But getting into the last section here, we previously reviewed current tech and models being developed and put on the market, but I want to jump ahead here to look at what I think is next in the industry. I think a lot of the world will continue as it is, especially with the middle class just growing immensely and adopting the practices that we've been using over the past 30 years or so. About 20% of the world's population lives in first world countries, like probably most of us here. And we're fortunate enough to have this opportunity to push solutions to the very problems that we've ourselves have caused. So we'll look at what I think some of those solutions are right now. Okay, so I think resale will continue to grow. And a short-term help to sustainability, as we talked about, is resale or secondhand. We said short-term because it's not indefinite, but they had a pretty good year in 2020. I think resale and secondhand generally bumps up when you have a recession. Resale is projected to be about 10% of sales in the next 6 years or so, which is up from about 6% of sales right now. And it's really great to keep product in circulation, but it only keeps pristine to kind of great product in circulation. I'm personally a ThredUp and RealReal user myself. I love them. I find that my products are often rejected though, because they're not in style or they're not in pristine condition. The group Remake, they say that 10 to 15% of donated clothing actually ends up in secondhand market. So that other 85 to 90%, like my stuff, gets rejected because it's not good enough to put on the shelf. It's a great thing to support, but it's not going to move the needle on sustainability because, you know, there are consumer expectations on wear and especially on style and what's cool. A cool thing here is that although some consumers look to resell for lower pricing, they can get a better deal than they would for new product. But a lot of them are looking to resale now for the pride it brings, which is very different from what it was just 5 years ago. Previously, we were over here, people were kind of embarrassed that they were buying secondhand and resale, but now people are kind of wearing it with pride. So I think that's an awesome trend to have. Another consumer shift that's based on moral questions is moving to vegan leather from animal-based leather. Consumers don't want to support an industry that's associated with cruelty, fortunately, anymore. Fur has been banned in a lot of parts of the world, but leather hasn't because it's a byproduct of the meat industry in most cases. So it's really up to what happens to the meat industry to determine at kind of a global scale what happens to leather. In the US, we've seen meat consumption actually fall in particular areas. Annual red meat consumption has fallen by 15% over the last 10 years, according to the USDA. And Global Meat News reports that a majority of Americans have reduced meat consumption in recent years. But that's just for the US. Looking at it globally, meat production is projected to be 15% higher this decade compared to last decade. And these growth trends are it's representative of most growth trends around the world in terms of sustainability, where across the world, the middle class is growing. And so those sorts of problems are going to grow across the middle class. But then they're decreasing in kind of choosy first world countries like ours who have the opportunity to change their practices. But overall, everyone's going to move in the right direction. Synthetics, I think, will be out eventually. Synthetics will be harder to replace than leather, unfortunately, though. Over 60% of our clothing is made from polyester, and synthetics are just plain cheap. Like, they're used everywhere because they're cheap and made from oil. Still, there could be policy in the future to eliminate the negative effects of microfiber pollution that could push us there even faster, which would be great. Since the average fleece jacket releases almost 2 grams of microfibers with every single wash, we should really consider a policy to change what we put into our clothing. And then the main reasons that subscription boxes have become popular in the last 10 years, where people wanting to try on before buying, like we talked about earlier, and also for discovery, because usually you could go into a store and kind of discover the new product. Subscription models in general, I think, will still account for a few percent of the market like they do today, but I think they're going to move more from kind of try at home boxes to more replenishment models for products that we're using and consuming on a more regular basis. To me, subscription boxes are kind of the new fast fashion. They just encourage unnecessary consumption. They're just always being fed that next thing. In addition to consumers recognizing how wasteful it is to be sent a big box of things and then to return a bunch back on kind of a consistent schedule, consumers will also have their appetites whetted with the excitement and the recommendations that they would get from digital fashion. So I think that can kind of replace it. With how powerful virtual try-on will be, it's pretty likely that big players, these really big brands, will vie to acquire a few of these software companies. So I see that being a trend even in the next 5 years. This is a related graph showing that consumers are starting to care less about that newness and trend, which should really help us to make a positive shift. But so that's over here on this side. But style you like, style is still top of mind. So we can never overlook that, even in sustainability. 2020 really pushed so much of our world to digital. This graph shows that e-commerce sales basically doubled from 2019 to 2020. So in 1 year, they doubled. And even though people weren't thinking about clothing the same way that they were thinking about toilet paper, Lysol cleaners, hand sanitizer, e-commerce still also grew, but it grew 30% last year. So when we enable virtual try-on, when we enable strong recommendation engines, digital wardrobes, and customized product, it will almost be a no-brainer for that focus to move online, because there will be even more available online than in person. As an example of fashion moving online, this was Balenciaga's much hyped fall/winter 2021 show. They were able to get creative with the new channel, turning each model into a video game character and allowing viewers to kind of choose their player. Although it wasn't physical, this digital affords more interaction, and especially more personalized interaction, because every single viewer can kind of choose their own adventure and follow their particular player. Other exciting things about virtual are that the products can be viewed in 3D, so you can view it from all angles. And eventually you'll be able to see what you look like in the clothing in third person, which is, I mean, maybe for some people they don't want that, but that is better than what you get in a store. You'll also be able to try on things with other items that you already own and get recommendations based on preferences and your body type. The last example, we looked at Balenciaga's gamified fashion show with virtual products that also exist in the real world and that you can purchase in the real world. What we're looking at here, though, are two real people, but they're wearing the same virtual dress that's not intended to exist in the real world at all. This is a strictly virtual dress, meaning that it only exists on the computer. This particular dress, created by the fabricant, was sold at a blockchain event for $9,500 to the woman here on the right. So this was the first, it was modeled like this and then sold to this woman. She, sent a photograph, they superimposed it on her, and here she is wearing this dress. It's unlikely that this kind of thing will take over a significant chunk of the market, since we all still, for now at least, live in the real world and clothing is made for more than just photos. But it does showcase that capabilities of digitized fashion and people's excitement, around the potential of digital. And if you want to go buy something today, you can go on Tribute Brand's website and go buy yourself a Maca shirt for $39. Then what you would do is send in a photo of yourself, within their requirements. And then one of their designers will superimpose the digital garment on your photo and send it back to you, and voila, you have a new t-shirt. So this is even happening today. I think they have probably 6 or 10 styles on their website up right now. So a lot of people believe that the best way to correct the fashion industry is to go through, it's like through policy pushing it, that there aren't enough other forces encouraging innovation and sustainability. We see a lot of forces at Unspun, though, like financial forces that encourage progress, but of course we also support legislation that's probably going to move faster, surprisingly. Especially in Europe and potentially in other fortunate parts of the world, both consumers and governments will hold brands accountable for the impact of the products that they make. At the moment, brands are incentivized to optimize for the point of sale. The product should be at its best quality and its highest price at that point, because that's where the brand reaps the most value. It's as simple as that. We previously looked at a pie chart showing what happens in returns. We saw that even brand new product that's being returned, about half the time gets discarded through landfill or downcycling, because there's no financial benefit to doing the right thing. The brands just don't do the right thing. So policy is moving towards regulations that protect the planet and give businesses disincentive from optimizing just for that point of sale, and hopefully give some sort of value to the rest of that process. France is banning unsold goods from being dumped in 2023 with its anti-waste law. This is huge, considering about a third of products from fashion brands aren't sold. So these brands are going to have to figure out what to do with all that excess, or in my opinion, just never make it to begin with. So figure out a way where you can just guarantee that you're not going to have that excess and won't have to deal with this legislation and these laws that will force you to figure that out. And we foresee a number of other European countries following suit with policy, and fingers crossed that it does come to the US as well. So can you believe that not even 10 years ago, more than half of brands didn't know where their garments were made, like very specifically. Over 3/4 didn't know where their fabrics were made, and then 90% didn't know the origins of their raw materials. And this sounds crazy, but having been in the industry for a while, I'm not at all surprised by this. It's such a convoluted and complicated supply chain, so it's very difficult to know where things are coming from. Fortunately, consumers like us are starting to pressure brands into figuring all of this out. A late 2020 report from BCG noted that sustainability was deemed important to at least 75% of Americans. I'm surprised it wasn't 100, but the 75%, that's pretty good. With more interest from the younger generation. So we're on trend for that getting better. And with increased transparency and traceability through blockchain and just better information flow, brands will be more closely associated with their environmental and social reputation. It won't only be easier for them to have that information, but they'll also be incentivized to be more responsible with the accountability of new platforms like Good On You, which is a third party that rates brands' actions. This is an example of their ratings right here. And then the Higg Index, which is a set of tools that allow companies to measure their impact. You can see some of their metrics right here. So this is very outward facing, and this is very behind the scenes, inward facing. So in addition to social and environmental responsibility, consumers have also started to expect more personalization. Some experts in the 90s and 2000s predicted personalization, but it really wasn't able to catch on at scale without the tech to back it. Now we have the tech, it's ready, and we've seen that consumers are willing to pay 25 to 50% premium for custom products. My personal favorite thing about made to order model and these personalized products is that it eliminates inventory, the excess, inventory in general, and especially excess inventory, but it also increases options at the same time. It used to be that when brands needed to be conservative, they would reduce the number of SKUs that they would have. But now they can flip that and they can keep almost infinite SKUs while avoiding excess altogether. So it's really the best of both worlds. So it's pretty cool that consumers are starting to be able to design their products, but can you imagine a future where computers can design our products? This day is almost here. I mean, this brand here on the left called Finesse is a fashion startup whose tech follows top influencers to create products that those influencers have recently posted, and then have customers vote for their favorites to be produced. The AI part of their company tracks the trends, and then the humans on their team basically design based on those trends. But I think in the not too long term, the computers will do the full thing. They'll not only track when, you know, Kylie Jenner, like when they post something and it goes viral, but they'll also have the computer design something, and then it will get pushed to the factory floor to be produced after enough people vote for it to be produced. It's kind of a beta brand built with AI. What I'm worried about here with them is their sustainability messaging. They kind of put that at the forefront, that we are more sustainable. To me, they're exploiting super short-lived trends. And that kind of goes back to one of the questions we were talking about earlier. But in the 90s, fast fashion was viewed the same way. When it came out, people said, oh, this is so much better because we can be much more reactive and we can be more agile. So if like standard brands at the time were designing around the 2 to 4 seasons. And so they would say, let's make this one thing, like this line, a year ahead of time. So we have to really guess what people are going to want, and let's just make a bunch of it. And then fast fashion came around and they said, we're going to do this every week. So we're going to be really smart about reacting to how people respond to the products that we're putting out there, and we'll make more of what they want. So there will be a closer to one-to-one relationship between what we make and what people buy. So that sounds great. Oh yeah, that's way better for the environment. But of course, we know now that they really perpetuated this consumption pattern, this need for more every week. And so that's something I'm wary of with this. Is I think it's great that they are pulling people and making sure that they're going to sell product first, but to exploit someone wears a like blue fanny pack that one day and then make it immediately. How long is that going to be in fashion for? That's what concerns me. Okay, and then on the right here is Amazon's new made for you t-shirts. So you answer some questions, you take some photos with your phone to get a t-shirt made from you from some measurements. I think that they're probably doing a great job with this. T-shirts are not crazy hard. So go get a $25 t-shirt if you want one. So at Unspun, we've allowed customers kind of a similar thing. We've allowed them to design, and then for the computers to perfectly pattern. So we view it as kind of a good relationship between the two. So first, the customer chooses a style, fabric, thread, rise height, hem length. And then after they've decided on their jeans, they then do a 3D scan with their phone. The scan creates an accurate avatar of their customer using infrared light, which is the same thing that you use for facial recognition when opening your phone. And our computer algorithms and the machine learning build a pattern in 3D around the person's avatar. And also, because we have the avatar, we can virtually fit the pattern and make sure we produce it. On the right here are some examples of, here were the pre-rendered. So these are the pants on the person's avatar in the computer. So these don't exist in real life. These are just virtual. Same with these as well. And then these pictures, so this is a picture of the person, with that avatar wearing those jeans. So it's really amazing to see what computers are capable of these days and how realistic it's getting. And I would say like three years ago, I could very easily tell the difference. And today it's becoming harder for me. I think in a year or 2 years, it's going to be impossible to tell which one came from a computer and which one is a real photo. Something that's missing in the last slide, and something we're focused on at Unspun, is automation. We believe it will enable onshoring, bringing manufacturing back to where products are sold. And this fashion made on demand, this made to order, this made to custom will be unlikely to catch on if we don't localize production, since customers expect quick turnaround times with pretty reasonable price. And based on Unspun's projections, the benefits to nearshoring and onshoring will outweigh the costs in just a couple of years. So it's coming. Our product right now costs $65 to produce today, and it's overseas. So that's the cheaper version. You know, when we were making onshore, it was double. But with automation, it will cost just $35 because we'll be able to remove the shipping costs, and then of course all those labor costs as well. In addition to the reduced costs, we're also going to have the turnaround time be from 22 days all the way down to not even 3 days. So that's huge benefit to being able to onshore. Earlier, we looked at globalization pushing clothing manufacturing overseas from the States, but rising costs overseas, the need for supply chain and product agility, turnaround time, and policy incentives are all encouraging us to reestablish manufacturing onshore again. And even McKinsey agrees that automation could really bring manufacturing back. The map here shows projections for lower price point jeans than the ones I just showed you, and also with a little bit more optimism for the ratio of automation. They put it up to 90% here. The comparison shows that nearshoring slightly ekes out onshoring in the immediate term. So that means, you know, Mexico is looking pretty good in the very, very immediate term in the next few years, but then presumed higher sell-through and lower freight and also duties, along with like improved automation, will kind of flip this in not too long. We think within the next 10 years. Probably the biggest reason we need automation in order to bring manufacturing back more quickly is that minimum wages across the country would force products to basically tenfold otherwise. We simply don't have that skilled labor in the States anymore either. It's pretty hard to find people who will sew a really good quality product for you. The missing piece for automation that's shown in this chart is cut and sew. So at Unspun, we skipped that part. Instead, we built 3D weaving, but there are other methods being developed to get around this as well. We previously looked at software automation, and we saw that they were replacing robots sitting at sewing machines. They rely, again, software automation relies on computer vision to manipulate fabrics, which are just inherently limp and flexible. Sobo, shown here, they take a different approach. They take and use a stiffening agent so that the materials can act more like sheet metal. So it's easier to predict and easier to control. And then at the end of production, the stiffener is dissolved in water. It looks a little bit clunky, a little ridiculous, but I think that this could work well for very, very, very simple products. Anything that's flat, anything that you need to manipulate, it's just, how are you going to do that with something that's so stiff? I think is really tricky. Here they're trying to do the t-shirt. It's hard to imagine the quality being very good, but sometimes you don't need a good quality t-shirt. Something that this would be really difficult in trying to do is, for example, a fly on a pair of jeans. I don't know if you've ever tried to sew a fly on a pair of jeans, but you need like 6 hands to do it. And there's just no way that a robot like this could figure out and manipulate it in such a way that it would work. So I think there's definitely a place for this, and excited to see where they take it. A way around sewing and the difficulties with manipulating fabric is to just skip that cut and sew stage and instead transition straight from yarn to final product. So this is what engineered or 3D knitting affords. These are CNC machines from Shimaseki that can, for the most part, knit a full garment. The company we looked at last session, Unmade, they were the ones with that's cool looking sweater. They use machines like this in some of their customization, since 3D knitting machines are on how the fashion industry distributes value. This chart breaks down the value capture in a custom product specifically, but it can be applied to other products as well, where cost goes to the scan and the patterning section of the pie chart. More of that would be for overstock losses and management on like a standard off-the-shelf kind of product. So this brand margin that you see here is comparable whether it's here made to order, like custom, or off the shelf. Brands, as you can see here, take home most of the value and control a lot of the game. Next are assembly houses, then patterning, 3D software, and fabric weaving, materials, and then finally 3D scanning. These last groups in the value chain have to control so much of their piece of the pie and block out competitors to survive. So looking at each piece, scanning companies are right here, are incentivized to push towards full platforms rather than work B2B white labeling for brands, because as a full platform, you can argue that you're going to be more valuable. Patterning software here those companies operate on high margins because their software, they scale very easily. So they're content to be behind the scenes supporting brands as long as there's not too much competition. And last week we saw Gerber and Lectra merge for this very reason, so they could take more of that market. Assembly houses here operate on super small margins because they're high costs. So they need to support a lot of brands. And then they're also often spreading the big ones are spreading hundreds of factories around the world just to chase those lower costs because it is such a small margin. And then weaving and material factories are less spread out because they're more automated. They're, cut and sew, as we've talked about, it's very manual. So you rely on manual labor and you need to be in a cheap place. But weaving and material facilities they're working with looms and knitting machines that are already, you don't need someone to run that by hand. You press the button and it goes. So they can be more consolidated, but they have also pretty low margins and there's a lot of competition. So it can be kind of a challenging business to get into. And then brands will be considered the winner in this value chain because of their brand name and their defensibility in that and the control they bring. But we have to remember that it's not easy to get to the top there. Like they have a really great place, but they had to get there somehow. They have to have a really strong story and a lot of engagement with consumers to get to that point. So a lot of things to think about as you approach a certain part of the value chain. At Unspun, we're really trying to capture a lot of it, as you can tell here in the blue. We're able to put a lot of the pieces together with our processes. Everything but we have raw material input as yarn, so that's material that we can't cover, and then the scan comes in from another company. But we're selling directly to the consumer through brand collaborations in our own brand. So that really helps us to address the market that way. Executing and controlling the production process allows us to control costs in addition to the prices as well. So one way that we're able to capture that per garment value is by combining processes with 3D weaving. I think it would be really tricky for us to go through the standard. It would not be possible for us if we were just going through and setting it up in the standard way that the supply chain is set up. It's just not possible to own that much of the market. But the way that we're taking it through 3D weaving, which skips from yarn to final product, allows us to try to make that jump. 3D weaving additionally gives us, the life cycle here on the right, as opposed to on the left, which is, I guess you don't call it a life cycle, but lifeline here on the left. We're trying to create circularity by reusing the material that goes into 3D weaving with the yarn. So there's really no need to go through the heavy processing and the fiber and yarn stages, because the fiber for every garment, because the yarn could be reused at the end of life. It wasn't cut up during the cut and sew. So the input will be yarn. You then weave it into the product. Someone buys it, uses it, returns it, unweaves it, and we're back to yarn again. So we don't have to go back and we don't have to dye it again. I mean, that could be a possibility, but you don't have to. You don't have to prepare the yarn. You don't have to grow it. Instead, you go back with the same yarn. So we're able to kind of skip those stages when we think about yarn as the input. We've talked about earlier that there are problems with recycling synthetics because the polymers shorten with every cycle, with every time that you try to recycle them. And there are problems with recycling natural fibers because, again, the fibers shorten with every time that you need to like mechanically cut them up. And then we've also talked about, or maybe I didn't get into this that much, but there's also arguably less push for composting because then you would have to, if you're composting, you go through and you have to start all over again every time you make a new product. So you're still emitting the same CO2 emissions, for example, and you still have the same problems with water. So it's at least with composting, it's not going to landfill and sitting there. It does go back to the system, but there are a number of companies who have actually opted for recycling over composting because they believe that it overall makes less of an impact. Very, very controversial. It's comparing apples to oranges, but I think that's something to consider as well. And so to us, kind of viewing that optimal phase as of a material to reuse, like that elemental piece has been yarn. Like how can we reuse yarn? Because that's at a great point to be reused again. An ideal situation would be biodegradable yarn or yarn that's not harmful to the environment, like we talked about with the microplastics. Since anything you put out there is not going to stay with the garment, it will go out into the world. It needs to be something that's not harmful. So that's sort of how we're viewing that cycle and the least harmful right now. So a lot of the solutions we've reviewed are worth the time and investment. I think it's going to take a lot of them to get to where we want to be. I'm personally invested in a few select solutions, but I think we need all of them. We see in the next few years, we'll see plant and bio-based leather alternatives flip the leather market. We'll see virtual try-on become the norm as more moves online. We'll see policy push us into a more responsible future. And we'll see consumers and computers be designers alongside each other. And then manufacturing, we believe, will return to the States. At the beginning, we talked about mechanization and automation efficiencies, making the industry overall less sustainable and less inclusive. But what's really cool about right now is that a lot of this tech that we see, even though the tech is more efficient and pushing us in that same direction, it's actually making us more sustainable and more inclusive. So I think the tech now is turning that point, which I think is very exciting. So when we reconvene in 5 years, I would be very lucky to see you all in 5 years. These are the things I think will be on the horizon. I challenge you guys to, tackle these opportunities in carbon negative models and production beyond our planet, in clothing that grows, and then truly and honestly self-sustaining circularity, which, as we've looked at, is a big challenge. I believe the most rewarding products and projects are the ones that really seem the least likely. So thank you guys all for listening today. It was really wonderful to meet you all at the breakouts and hear your questions, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.